Sounds good. I'll open the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, March 1st, 2021. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gaffino,
Here.
Trustee Curtis,
Here.
Trustee Lowry,
Here.
Trustee Gately,
Here.
Dave, anybody, any audience comments out there?
No, Mayor, I see no one asking to speak.
Trustee comments? Okay, discussion item 1, Orchard Gateway, Hanson Boulevard Streetlight Replacement Project. Is that John?
Yes, it will be John, but I will do a quick overview.
Sure.
This is a project where we are replacing LED streetlights on Orchard Gateway. As you recall, we have replaced all of the neighborhood lights with LEDs. In this case, it's a little more intense because it's also pole replacement as well. And as you can see, there's going to be pictures on the memo of the current condition of the poles. The purpose of tonight's meeting is not about the LEDs, it's about the poles. So what we're trying to do is gauge the different materials out there and what the board's preferences are. We're trying to get direction so that we can move forward with picking an option. If we're going to change them, we want to make sure the board knows what's available first. With that, John is going to go through all of these specs.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mayor. As Steve mentioned, this is kind of the fourth and final phase of this project. There's about 970 lights that we've already changed in town, and this is going to be the last 45 or 50 or so lights. So before you today is just kind of a decision to make on Orchard Gateway and Hanson. So I'll explain a little bit about the existing conditions on Orchard Gateway, and then kind of the options and what staff is thinking. So on Orchard Gateway, the poles are 35 feet in height. They are currently high pressure sodium bulbs in them, and they're on steel poles on concrete bases. When staff went and looked at the poles, the steel poles were rusting, and this was probably a combination just because they do need to be painted at regular intervals, and I don't think we kept up with the maintenance on the painting. But they also rust because of the salt and how close the street is to the poles. They have a tendency to get the salt spray on them, which can accelerate the rust on those poles. When in the not so recent past, we did have one of these poles fall over in traffic. Fortunately, it was in the middle of night, and the police were able to clear it before it became a hazard. So the poles, we believe, really do need to be replaced. The concrete bases themselves are in good condition. We believe that they can be reused. And for that reason, the two options that are probably the best for Orchard Gateway would be either, again, replacing these poles with a steel pole that could be the same color as the current ones. We could replace them with aluminum poles, or we can replace them with the concrete poles that we use throughout the residential neighborhoods. In any of the cases, staff looked at the photometrics, which kind of determines the actual light that hits the pavement to determine the optimal height of the poles. With any of the options we select, we'd be recommending lowering the poles by 5 feet. So they'd go from 35-foot poles to 30-foot poles. And that would help with the cost a little bit too. And when you install the LEDs instead of the high pressure sodium bulbs, the light is more directed and focused on the pavement, and it's going to be it's going to appear brighter. So we believe that by lowering those poles, we're not going to lose anything. It's actually going to increase the brightness on the road, and we're going to get I think a brighter road and more focused light. So really the question would be which type of pole we'd like to use. And we didn't think that the concrete pole that we use in residential neighborhoods was the best option, because that's a direct burial pole, meaning the pole would bury directly into the ground. And once the steel poles would be removed, we'd still have those concrete bases remaining along the right of way. So typically we'd recommend demolishing them like 18 inches below grade, just so that we could cover them up with topsoil. But since they're in such good condition, we kind of figured it'd be a shame not to reuse those. So kind of taking the concrete pole out of the discussion with Orchard Gateway, we're left with the steel and the aluminum. Currently on the west end of Orchard Gateway near the auto mall, and kind of right where the water tower is in Sherwin-Williams on Orchard Gateway, the poles transition from this steel to aluminum. So staff felt that kind of keeping the aluminum poles would be more consistent. So it'd be our recommendation to go with those aluminum poles for two reasons. One, it would maintain the consistency and continuity along the corridor, but also those poles are salt resistant. So we wouldn't have to face them rusting or the future possibility of them rusting to a point where they'll fall. The life of those poles are typically about 50 years. In comparison to the steel poles, which is about 30. And it's our understanding right now that the cost is about the same. So on Orchard Gateway, we'd be recommending replacing the steel poles with the aluminum ones. And I don't know if the village board wanted to respond at this time about Orchard Gateway, and then I can explain to Hanson Boulevard, or if you want me to just continue, I can go on to Hanson as well.
You can just continue, I think, continuing.
Okay, so on Hanson Boulevard, that's where our auto mall is, and we have had several calls from the auto mall requesting that we change the bulbs in those lights from the high pressure sodium to the LEDs, which I think everyone on staff agrees. All the lights in that auto mall have been changed from the high pressure sodium to the LEDs on private property. So the dealerships all have those LEDs. Now it's our opportunity to replace our bulbs to be consistent with the auto mall. So I think replacing the lights isn't really a question on Hanson. It's again a question of what poles we would replace. Currently, those poles are 20 feet in height. The bases are actually in a little bit worse condition. Some of them have been poured kind of oblong. So when they were originally poured, I'm not sure if they used the proper sonotubes to do it, or it just seems like they're a little poorer quality than what was done on Orchard Gateway. They are cracking a little bit, and the concrete is spalling as well. So it's one of those situations where I'm not real confident that it'd be a good idea to use those existing concrete bases again. The options for the poles remain the same. It would be a concrete pole, a steel pole, or an aluminum pole. All would be 20 feet in height. The advantage of using a concrete pole in this instance would be the bases are bad, so we demolish them anyway, and then we direct burial the concrete pole into the ground, and we just install the lights. And it'd be a little bit of a different feel. All of the poles on the private property are either aluminum or steel, so the concrete ones would stand out a little bit. Our other option is to use steel or concrete poles, or I'm sorry, steel or aluminum poles. The steel, again, is currently there, and it is also experiencing a little bit of rust right now. We've seen that the skirt around the bottom of the bolts is starting to rust, and the panel that covers the wiring, it has fallen off and rusted off as well. This is another situation where, because the poles are close to the pavement, they do get overspray from the salt, and that salt can accelerate the corrosion that those steel poles are experiencing. In this instance, what staff is recommending we do with the bid is, what we'd like to do is get an alternate bid in this instance. So we'd like to get a bid for aluminum poles, and the possibility of using either an aluminum base, or I'm sorry, a concrete base, or what they call a helical base, because there is a limited amount of room in this median, and we're not entirely confident that there'd be enough room for a concrete base. And if you're wondering what a helical base would look like, it's basically like a corkscrew. So if you, for a wine bottle, and you just dial that into the ground, and then on the top, you would fix the light pole right to the top of it, and it functions similar to a concrete base. The other option that we would like to consider is essentially just using the existing poles as they are and replacing the lights. We don't feel that these are in imminent danger of falling over. And we believe that we could probably get another 5 to 7 year lifespan out of the poles. If that was the case, we could replace the lights still with LED light bulbs. And then in 7 years, when the light bulbs are bad, we could then revisit replacing the poles at that time. So the staff recommendation on this street is essentially to kind of get two prices in our bid. One for the aluminum poles with a corkscrew base, the aluminum poles with a helical base, and then simply just replacing the lights and leaving the poles as they are. So those are kind of the options that we see for both Orchard Gateway and Hanson Boulevard. Again, Hanson Boulevard is kind of an alternate bid, and Orchard Gateway, we would just simply be recommending the replacement of the existing poles with the non-corrosive aluminum poles on the existing bases, which are 5 feet shorter than the existing poles.
John, you mentioned getting two bids, but you said the same thing, helical and the corkscrews. You meant helical and concrete for Hanson?
Correct, I'm sorry, yes.
I would just have one question about that. They already have concrete now. You think that's why they're oblong, because of some space issue, or?
The concrete base is kind of like a pier that you'd pour for like a deck post. And I think what happened, I'm not sure that they either used a strong enough sonotube, like when they poured the concrete, and it just kind of expanded on them and got away from them.
You don't think there's room for that again? Is that what you're recommending, the corkscrew, or?
I'm kind of recommending the corkscrew because I'd like to get a cost on it in comparison to that concrete base.
Okay.
What about the concrete poles? Could they fit in there?
Yes, I'm sorry, and that is another alternative I'd like to add to that Hanson Boulevard option. So we could get a price for the direct burial concrete poles as well, because they would not require a helical base or a concrete base. So that's certainly another alternative that we'd like to add to the bid as well.
And they're less expensive than the aluminum poles, huh?
The concrete poles typically are, and again, really, it's more of an aesthetic drawback to some extent with the concrete. It wouldn't be consistent kind of with the poles that are on Orchard Gateway or in the auto mall themselves.
What's the longevity for a concrete pole versus aluminum?
The concrete are getting better. So right now, I believe they used to be about 20 years, but the manufacturer has recently been putting a coating on them that could last maybe another 5 or 10 years.
Versus 50 for the aluminum?
Correct.
Yeah, but the aluminum, just so you know, it's corrosive resistance. What that means is that they're not going to rust, hopefully won't rust and fall on some of these cars they're driving by.
Right.
The aluminum one actually is a better product. It does require some maintenance. But yeah, I think you're on the right track, John.
Hey, John, I had a question. I was just looking at the graph here, and it's talking about the different elements of them. And it says here under the concrete pole for the Orchard Gateway that the lifespan is projected to be 50 years with a protective coat. And it shows the price of that pole as about $4,000. And the steel one, you wanted the aluminum one, right? That's $8,000. So I'm just wondering, and you said you didn't want to demolish the concrete bases along Orchard Gateway. So I'm just wondering, because the concrete is half the cost of the other one, how much is it to demolish? Is it not worth it to just demolish the concrete and put in the base concrete base and put in a concrete pole, since it's so much less money? If you're going to be replacing 43 of 65 of them.
Correct. It could be cheaper to put the concrete poles in on Orchard Gateway. The demolition of the concrete bases themselves could be, I'd say, I don't know if I have it in the chart or not. I believe it's like around $1,200 each pole. So
Okay.
It would bring that cost up to maybe $6,200. And that could be something we do as well. I mean, if the board would like to see an alternate pricing on Orchard Gateway, we can get prices on the concrete poles as well as the aluminum poles for Orchard Gateway as well.
I was just curious. Thank you.
No, John, I would be inclined to go for the aesthetic purpose of the aluminum pole, despite the cost. But I'm a little concerned about that screw mounting. Is that secure as a concrete mount?
I am not as familiar with that as our village engineer is, Brandon. He has used those in the village of Woodridge in the past, and he said he hasn't had any problems with them. So I know they are a newer technology, but the ones that they've installed, he's had relative success with, and it's on a similar corridor, International Parkway there, that kind of leads through an industrial area. So I can't.
The aluminum's much lighter than the steel.
Correct.
Aluminum pole is just lighter.
And they're only
And they're made,
so yeah.
it's probably okay, Mike.
I also assume that there's probably a much higher level of difficulty to install concrete over aluminum. You know, so when you're looking at both, I mean, I would think that one would be perhaps more expensive on the pole, but easier, or perhaps the labor to install it a little on the easier side. Would that be right?
That could be the case. I know the transport of the concrete poles can increase the cost as well sometimes, just because they're a heavier product. It may be more cumbersome for the contractor to install them as well, because they do weigh a bit more.
So can you recap, John, on what you're looking for, or what,
Sure.
so everybody's clear?
Yeah, essentially, what I was presenting is kind of trying to get a feel for what options the board would like to see coming back in a future contract. So when we write the specifications, we can acquire alternate pricing for a lot of these options because pricing wasn't really addressed in this presentation. What we can do is on Orchard Gateway, if we wanted, we could get the cost of, say, the pricing for an aluminum pole on the existing base. And then maybe we can also get the cost for a concrete pole and the demolition of the existing base as a comparison. On Hanson, we can get the cost of an aluminum pole with both the concrete base and the helical base. We could get the cost of a concrete pole, and then we can get the cost of just installing the LED lights on the existing poles, is what right now I'd propose if the board was okay with.
I think
it's
that sounds good.
Yes,
Sounds good to me.
I'm fine, okay, all
good to go.
right, very good, thanks,
Great
John.
idea. Great idea.
Anything else? Anybody? All right, item 2, petition 21-01, Opus I-88 Corporate Park. Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. Item 2 has been discussed at the Plan Commission. They held a public hearing in January. The board actually spoke about this concept. This is the development of the Valley Green Golf Course and a parcel of land by Euclid Beverage for industrial third-party logistics centers, warehousing. And at the last council meeting, there was some further discussion from the board reviewing the Plan Commission's comments and whatnot. And what the staff does at this point is on something this big, we went back with the attorneys and started drafting all the appropriate ordinances. It's back for your review again tonight. And then Mike Toth will give a presentation, and he will be looking for your direction on whether to move it forward as is to the village board for approval.
Thank you, Steve. I won't be giving a formal presentation, but I just want to highlight that there are 3 items that we're looking for tonight. The first being just feedback on the ordinance in general. The ordinance is all encompassing of the map amendment to rezone the golf course property to the ORI district, the site plan, the preliminary plat, and the special use to designate the property as a planned unit development, which would include the Valley Green Golf Course and the Euclid Beverage property. Second being the landscape plan. One of the 3 conditions that came from the last, it was the February 1st committee of the whole meeting, was to revisit the landscape along the northern portion of the property, which is adjacent to the residential. And lastly, there are 2 conditions of approval that the developer will be requesting be removed. One being a staff-derived condition, and the other being one of the conditions that was recommended by the village board. So with that, I'll go ahead and open the presentation and allow Opus to go through and touch on these items that I had just mentioned. Again, looking for feedback on those 3 specific items. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate the introduction. The presentation for tonight will be a lot shorter than what you've seen in the past. So my name is Josh Bauer, and I'm here on behalf of Opus Development Company to continue the discussion on our proposed 3-building industrial redevelopment of the Valley Green Golf Course property. Steve covered a lot of this already, but we were at the Plan Commission on January 5th and received unanimous recommendation to proceed to the Committee of the Whole. On February 1st of the Committee of the Whole, the trustees had some feedback on the landscaping, and so we've spent some considerable time working on enhancing that landscaping. And then also, as Mike alluded to, we've dug into the special use ordinance that's going to govern our approvals, and we have a couple of items that we're looking to be removed in order for this to be a successful development and subsequently be able to lease these buildings. So with that, Mike, you can go ahead and flip to the next slide. As I said, real brief tonight, I've got an aerial and location map and the site plan in there just for reference, but really want to focus this first on the special use ordinance and the conditions that we need to ask to be removed in order for this to be a successful development, and then ultimately get into the landscape revisions that were made to give everybody some additional comfort on how we've designed the project. So Mike, if you want to go ahead to slide 5, slide 5, the ordinance slide. There you go. So as I mentioned, these are the two conditions in the ordinance that we're looking to have removed. So the first condition we were looking to have removed is letter I. All on-site trucking activities shall be effectively monitored and regulated to minimize any light, sound, and odor emissions. The primary concern we have is that any prospective tenant is only going to be interested in leasing our property if they can operate it under their normal operating conditions. So while we can work with the village and the tenants should any issues arise, which we wouldn't anticipate, we cannot force the users to minimize light, sound, and odor during their operations. Light, sound, and odor are all naturally occurring through a tenant's use, similar to how they would occur during vehicular traffic on 31. And it's natural to expect that it would occur here. With that said, we have designed our site plan with the largest possible buffer to the residential to the north to naturally eliminate the impacts of light, sound, and odor from impeding those residents' right to quiet enjoyment of their homes. And shortly, I'll get into the landscape enhancements we have made to further reduce these items from being an impact to the residents. And lastly, I just wanted to say that the village does have very restrictive noise ordinance conditions, and thus, we will be needing to comply with those as well. The second condition we're requesting to be removed would restrict the hours of operation for prospective users, and that reads as follows. The petitioner shall limit the hours of operation on site to minimize the impact of the business operations on adjacent properties and cooperate with village staff to address neighboring property concerns. So I mentioned this on the February 1st meeting that this was going to be a major issue. So I'm sure you're not too surprised to hear that we're seeking that this condition be removed. After educating ourselves as best as we could with many of the users and tenants that we've worked with and those in the marketplace, it's simply not a condition that we could agree to. With use restrictions in place, we would not be able to obtain financing, nor would we be able to lease these buildings. Users must be able to access the facility on a 24/7 basis. Many users do not end up needing access to the buildings after hours, which I know everyone's primary concern is going to be, at night and the lights shining after hours. But many users do not need to access buildings. Most of their operations occur between 8 to 5. However, prohibiting them is simply too restrictive, and it's going to make it too difficult to sign leases with prospective renters. So I wanted to make sure I covered that first. Those are two critical items that we need to be removed in order to move forward with the development. So with that, Mike, you can go ahead to the landscape slide. I want to talk about some of the enhancements that we've made, mostly to building B. As everyone's aware, and what we talked about during the last committee of the whole meeting, and what we heard loud and clear was the concerns of those residents and trying to screen the property as best we could to prevent light. And I think we've tried to do that. So building A, I think, yeah, so building A, there's not much here. I've got it in the deck. But building A, you know, we've captured here in yellow all of the existing trees that are there today. So you can see that there's naturally very strong buffering on the east side to Euclid, and some good buffering as well to the west. And so what we've done is created a number of parkland trees off of Overland Drive, a number of trees in the parking lot, and then many additional trees on the west side of the property and on the north side as well. So we feel pretty good about how building A looks. I didn't hear any concerns about that at the last meeting. So with that, I think we can go to building B, Mike. So as I said, the north property line was the critical one that we've studied. Our original proposal included 52 trees on the north property, and at the direction of the village board, we studied this and we released a tree surveyor to go out and actually do a GPS study on all of the trees, grade all of the trees, really understand what we can keep, what needs to go, and thus now what you're looking at is a fully baked landscape plan, whereas before it was really conceptual. Before we were trying to comply with code, and we were trying to design the trees, spread the trees out, but we didn't actually know where they were. So now what we've laid out is the actual locations of all of the trees. And based on the locations of those trees, we've gone ahead and we've added 16 new evergreen trees. And we've also taken 6 evergreen trees that were on side yards that were already located in densely screened areas that weren't really providing a benefit to the project. And we've moved those 6 trees over to the north side as well. So 22 new trees have been added. And I'm counting upwards of 74 new trees being added to the north side of the property from what exists today. And based on the information that we have, 30 existing trees today on the north side. So with 74 new trees, over 100 new trees on the north boundary. And keep in mind, this does not include any of the ComEd shrubbery and trees that they have on their property. Those did not come up on our GPS surveying. So there's going to be additional buffering there as well. With that, I think we can go to building C. Again, you know, building B was really, as you know, from the site plan, as you get further west on the property, you continue to get a larger buffer from the residential. And so we really focused our efforts on building B, but even building C, we've since been able to add 5 new evergreen trees. You can see those in light blue. Those are trees that we added in areas that there was a little bit of a gap. And so we've tried to screen building C as well. So building C, we're 56 trees on the north side there, and then adding 5 more. So upwards of 61 trees on the north side of building C. So with that, pause and turn it over to the trustees to, you know, we value your feedback. We heard you loud and clear. We've tried to do, you know, everything that we can to really buffer this, screen it, while at the same time, you know, asking for relief on a couple of those conditions, just simply so we can operate and have a successful development. I think it's important that, you know, I know you all want us to be able to lease the properties for obvious reasons, and we wouldn't be pushing back if it wasn't a critical, you know, 2 critical items. So with that, I'll pause and I'll turn it over for feedback.
I have a question. You're just using trees. What about shrub and filling in those areas between those 2 rows of trees? Would that be possible, and as a more of a buffer, a sound reducer at least?
So we have all of the ComEd shrubbery there, significant shrubbery onto the north of building B in particular. I know that there is significant shrubbery that was added to building A, but building B, my understanding was with all of the shrubbery that was there on the ComEd property, that the goal and focus was really to get those 6-foot evergreens there, really screen it, you know, taller, larger trees, which are going to grow 1 to 2 feet every year. So, you know, upon building completion, these 6-foot trees, but based on our underwriting of a 2-year lease up, these might be 12-foot high. But there will be shrubbery mixed in there.
Are the yellow noted existing trees? You got as existing trees. Is that what's there or existing before you revamp the drawing?
Yeah, so the yellow trees are, and maybe it's best to go to building B, because I think building B really captures it the best, because that's where we really focus. So the yellow trees are trees that are shown as there today. And apologies, I know I think you have the printouts, which are probably going to be a higher res version. But those will be existing trees. And then the white tree, the white colored are going to be new trees that have been proposed to be added. Those were added a while back. And
why not put more evergreens there? Because, from like November through May, all the deciduous, all you're going to have a stick there, and the sound's going to carry big time. You did add some evergreens, but I counted, I think, 23. I personally rather see, instead of your proposed, I can't even tell what they are, just the deciduous ones. Why not put more evergreens? Because that'll be year-round soundproof. I just concerned that sound's going to carry. Even if you have shrubbery that drops its leaves, it's going to carry unless you do evergreens or even shrub evergreens. But plus, they're going to be able to see through it, and it's not going to be probably that awful to look at. But I just thought more conifers would be better.
Yeah, a lot of the existing trees are very mature, and they're, but yeah, I think we really did try to focus on those evergreens and try to add those evergreens there versus, as you said, the deciduous. I think we've definitely focused our attention and tried to capture that.
So you can't take out some of those. I don't know what else your proposed ones are, and just throw more evergreens. I mean, you got a lot of. I don't know how many you got of shade trees, or I can't really tell what you have there, ornamental trees, but I mean, they're almost the same price. I would like to see more evergreens there. I really think it's going to be a value added item if you can do that. They may be a little more, but they're not a whole lot more.
Yeah, and I know we've added 51 new evergreen trees, which is a lot. I think a lot of the deciduous that would be showing up on the plans are existing. So we're keeping those there. They're good trees. They graded well. They're good trees to have, and so we've tried to implement those evergreen trees so that they fit in with those.
I'm just saying, instead of putting a shade tree in or a pear tree, to add some more conifers. That's all. My only thought.
Understood. Thank you, Mayor.
How big are the evergreen trees that are going to go in initially? Did you say, Josh, 6 feet tall?
Yeah, those will be 6 feet tall, and they're expected to grow 12 to 24 inches year over year. So, as I said, when we complete construction, while we'd love to have a tenant, it's not always the case, and based on some underwriting of a 1 to 2 year lease up, those trees could be as tall as 12 feet tall by the time anyone was actually driving trucks and operating in the park.
Would they be like fir trees or like a white pine? I mean, I have both in my yard, and white pine are just kind of, they're just kind of big and fluffy, where the firs are more dense. I'm just wondering if there's any thought about the type of conifers you're going to put in there.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely been a lot of thought given, and my apologies for not having our landscape architect on to give you all of the details on that, but I know, we tend to try to mix them. You don't want all of the trees to be the same because of pests and disease. But I know that they've tried to do that they're the experts, and they've really tried to do that.
And Mayor Gaffino, to your point too, is that existing condition E still requires that a tree survey be done. They did a preliminary study by using the GPS calculation. However, we still have to go through and do a tree survey. So maybe at the point when they submit that inventory, we can take a look at the species along the northern boundary and revisit those deciduous, and maybe look at adding the conifer where possibly we needed, or establishing some of those more dense evergreen hedgerows.
There's talk about a fence, and I mean, you could put out a row of spruce trees, and I'm not saying eliminate the existing what's there, but I'm just saying if they're adding crab trees and maple trees and all that, why not, you know, go lighter on that and go heavier on the conifers to have that year-round screenage, because you're gonna see right through that come, you know, mid-November to at least April, you know, so 5 months of the year, you're gonna see, you know, whatever you're gonna see, but if you can get, you know.
Yeah, we agree. We agree with you loud and clear. So we, to Mike's point, we've done, we've released all that. We've gotten all of the surveys back. We put it all, you know, we put the landscape plan together, but we actually do have the surveys of the species and how they graded. We'd be more than happy with your approach to work with staff and review that together. And if there's the opportunity, I mean, I know we're not talking about a complete overhaul here, but if there's an opportunity to add some additional evergreens, or conifers, we're more than happy to do.
Right, and instead of a pear tree or whatever crab tree, I'd rather see that.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we did hear your feedback on the 1st of February, and so I think a lot of these are going to be existing. A lot of these deciduous trees are existing trees, and that's why they're there.
Yeah. Hey, what about building A? Isn't it surrounded by industry and not residents?
Yes.
That's right.
Well, why be, could you transfer some of the proposed trees for that area back to that? I'm concerned about the residents on the north side of the property. That's my big issue. Personally, I think others share that concern. What about that idea? Saving a little bit of money on building A and adding to building C and B?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would say is I know that the code requires, the code will look at total lineal footage on the side yard, and you know, I think you divide that number by 40, and that's the total number of trees that you have to have per code. So we'd want to look at that and make sure, but that's part of what we studied was where are there trees that aren't providing a benefit? Can we relocate those to the north side of building B? We were able to do that with about 11 total trees. But I think as part of, you know, part of our review, we'd be more than happy to revisit that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, there still is an existing condition that evergreen trees be added. So what we can do is work through the landscape plan once submitted. Once we have both surveys and inventory information, we can kind of look through it in its totality and then still apply the condition that still remains in the ordinance right now that evergreen trees be added. So we can work with them as we work through that process to see where there are abilities to maybe introduce more and remove some of the existing deciduous and find those opportunities where we can, especially along the northern portion of building B.
No, I'd like to bring up the fact that it doesn't matter how much landscaping we put in. 2 of the parameters of the ordinance that they want to have removed deal directly with operations, sound, odors, and things like that that can be generated from the development. My concern is more with, are we now allowing unrestricted operations? You know, what recourse do residents have if there are problems? I mean, I just don't want this to turn into another, you know, where we have the mine over by Chesterfield and there was blasting and odor and noise and things like that. So what recourse would we have if we took those 2 parameters of the ordinance out?
Yeah,
that's a fair question. We actually do have environmental performance standards in our zoning ordinance that pertain to odor, dust, noise emissions. We never had to apply it in a warehouse setting, but we have for other industrial properties that the noise ordinance does have specifications for noise originating from a industrial property and the amount of daytime and nighttime sound that can be transpired to corresponding property lines. So we've never had to do it for a warehouse. We've had to work with on-site management, namely the Liberty development over on Mitchell Road, where those buildings are extremely close to the Chesterfield townhomes, and they're separated by a small the night core easement there. So we've had to work in that case too, but that's in very close proximity. It's nowhere near the amount of setback and space you have between the operations of this site to the corresponding residential. But we do have code abilities to work through code enforcement if there is an issue.
Thanks, Mike.
And we fully expect to follow those ordinances. It's one of the reasons we're asking for, relief in our own ordinance, because these are binding. We plan to follow them.
I think it sounds good. I think it's a reasonable proposal. I like the idea to add maybe some more evergreen trees like the mayor said, but I think the project is looking good to me. That's my thoughts.
And just to note too, they did add the sidewalk to the final site plan. I know that was a condition. So upon final ordinance approval and consideration, that would be removed. It's because the sidewalk along Overland Drive has been added.
Trustee Martinez, any thoughts?
Yeah, I strongly agree with you, Mayor. I like the idea of the evergreens. It makes total sense. All the other trees are going to lose their leaves, and the evergreens are about the only thing that's going to give them a good buffer. And the other thing is, I don't think our code was specifically set up for the nature of noise as far as the planting of the trees. So even if our code states, let's say 10 trees per so many square feet, this is a specific case where you probably want to have more than less. And also the success rate on some of those trees that are going to be transplanted here or there and moved is probably going to be less than some of the other ones that are fresh trees that are just recently planted. So I would like, I appreciate the effort. I'm concerned with the people that live in that subdivision. I would like to make sure that that the noise is it's handled and not taken lightly as far as their views, their noise, and those evergreens. I think are the best way to go. So I would like to see the most you can fit in there.
Understood. And just to be clear, Trustee Martinez, and my apologies if I was unclear. When I was mentioning the relocation of some trees from side yards or areas that didn't properly, didn't add enough benefit, I didn't actually mean relocate existing trees. I was just mentioning that our original landscape plan had some trees in those areas. So instead of planting new trees there, we're going to plant the new trees on the north side. We're not actually going to dig up and move trees.
Okay.
And we'll also have warranty obligations to replace the trees, just the way we did on our other development on Orchard Gateway. It's obviously important those trees maintain their integrity.
I think it's
Very good.
reasonable that you ask for the non-threat-to-be limits on the hours of usage in a way that, how are you going to get a tenant to go in there if you're going to limit them before they even sign a lease? So I think that's a reasonable request. And so I think for me, if you really have a lot of evergreens, I think that's everybody's concern, is just that we feel like the evergreens are just going to mitigate that sound, and therefore if the barrier is such, then it's a reasonable request that you can not have limited hours there.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There are also different tiers in the site plan that we can evaluate prior to final consideration, being that it might not be specifically on the northern portion of the property, because you will have maintenance concerns with the mowing within those areas adjacent to the ponds. And we can also look to, again, front load that area, but also to look for areas within the site between the building and some of the drive aisles for evergreen opportunities as well. So there'd be more of a staggered approach to creating that sort of natural buffer and barrier to the north.
Sounds good.
Okay, anything else? Okay. All right, thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything, no exec session? I think we're done. A motion adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So, second.
All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
See you all.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.